Hello, and welcome to my webinar today, Saving for Retirement. Am I doing it right? In this webinar, I'll be sharing the process that I use when I'm working with a client to determine their retirement needs and examine what changes and adjustments they may need to make to their current strategy. So before I get started, I just want to let you know that there will be time for Q&A at the end. So feel free to type your questions into the chat box as we go, and then I'll get to as many as I can at the end. Any that I'm not able to get to, I'll answer offline. And then also, as we're going, I'm going to launch a couple polls here and there throughout the presentation. So please chime in with your answers. Just helps to give me some feedback as we're going, since obviously we're not in person. So just a little bit about me. My name is Tiffany Fry, and I own Glassine Financial Services, where I provide financial coaching and counseling services to people who are looking to improve their money mindset and create some accountability around their spending and savings habits. I can help with budgeting, spending habits, find ways to reduce and eliminate debt, and improve habits around using debt, and also help with a variety of savings goals, including retirement savings, which is what we're covering today. I just want to clarify that I am not an investment advisor or a financial advisor. I actually was a financial advisor with Mutual of Omaha prior to opening my business, but now I partner with several amazing advisors. So if you need advice when it comes to your investment strategy, I'm more than happy to put you in touch with a professional in that area. As for where I'm located, I live near Tinley Park on the southwest side of Chicago, although my clients are all over the country. Most of my coaching is done over the phone and virtually, although I do meet clients in person if they're local. And then I also do workshops with HR departments for their employees. And I'm also a licensed life and health insurance agent in 8 states. So, okay, enough about me. You are here to learn about retiring. So I'm actually going to start out by launching my first poll. Let me get that up on the screen here. And I will give you a few minutes. Sometimes there's a delay, so I'll give you a few minutes to answer the question here. Do you feel like you have enough money saved up for retirement? So go ahead and answer yes, no, or you're not sure. Give you a few more seconds for people to chime in. Okay, so it looks like we have about 70% of the attendees today are saying no. About 10% aren't sure, and then about 20% are saying yes. So that's about what I find in my practice. Is most people come to me obviously because they don't feel like they have enough or they're not sure. So if you're not feeling confident about your retirement, you're actually not alone. There was a study done by Experian, and they found that 71% of Americans feel like they don't have enough money saved up for retirement. And then 46% in the survey said that they have less money saved up than they thought they would 5 years ago. So saving money for retirement is definitely a challenge for a lot of people. So today I'm actually going to give you the steps that I use in my process when I'm helping clients with their retirement program. And my goal today with this webinar is that you can take these tips and use them to guide you in your decision-making process. And then hopefully you'll walk away with some new knowledge that you can use right away. I'm going to cover 4 topics in the video. The first one, I'm going to show you how to figure out your budget and your income needs. The second, I'm going to go over the tax implications of various types of retirement assets. I'm going to talk about understanding the effect of interest earned on your retirement accounts and the withdrawals that you make and how they interact with each other. And then last, I'm going to talk about a volatility buffer, what that is and why you need one. All right, so let's dive in. So the first thing that everyone asks me when I start working with them is how much money or how much income are we going to need? And of course, I don't have a crystal ball. There are some logical projections and calculations that we can do to help figure that out. So there are some financial planners who try to figure out a single number and set that as a goal to work towards. So they'll look at your income today and they make an assumption that you'll need about 70% of that income in your first 10 years, 60% in the next 10, and then 50% in your last 10. So they do some math and they pop out a number. They might tell you, you need $1.5 million at retirement age. But I don't do it this way. I don't like doing this because it's really not individualized to you using those types of assumptions. And you are unique, and obviously your numbers are going to be a very important piece of this puzzle. So these are the things that I take into account when I work with a client. So first, I start by having them think about how they want to live in retirement. So we actually do an exercise. So if you close your eyes and picture your retirement, the first 10 years, you've retired and you've got 10 years ahead of you, where do you see yourself living? What type of home? In what location? So is it a condo? Is it a house? Is it the same house you're in now? Is it on a beach, in the mountains? Picture where you see yourself living. Think about what are you doing for entertainment and fun? What kind of health will you be in? Then you do that same visualization exercise for the second 10 years and then for the third 10 years. So you do, get three different pictures of how you want to live in each decade. And this vision, doing these exercises, it helps you to understand the standard of living that you want to have. Some people plan on doing more in retirement. They want to do more traveling, purchase a second home, play more golf. And then some people plan on downsizing. They want to get a smaller home or a cheaper, find a cheaper place to live or a quiet location in the country and never leaving it. So you really have to get your mind around this before you can even start your planning. You have to know what you want to do. And then in the later years, that third decade and maybe even the second decade of retirement, you even need to think about what type of care you want to receive when you're not able to take care of yourself. What kind of facility do you want to be in? What level of care do you want to receive? Do you want to stay in your home? Do you want to go to a nursing home or a facility? Maybe even think about specific facilities that you want to go to. So it's very important to really get an understanding of how you want to live, what that standard of living is going to be before you even start to write numbers down. So this is step one. So after you've done this exercise, then we move on to step two, which is thinking about the cost of healthcare. I'm sure you're very aware of how expensive healthcare is, and it doesn't get cheaper when you're retired. So let's talk about a few critical things that you need to be aware of. So first of all, if you retire before you're 65 years old, Medicare will not cover you. You're going to have to find a private insurer until you're 65, and that is extremely expensive. So you need to take that into account. Now, once you're 65, if you're eligible for Social Security benefits, you're automatically going to be enrolled in Medicare, at least Medicare Part A, which is the very basic hospital coverage. And that is free, but it doesn't cover much. And it is a huge mistake to only have that level of coverage. Most people purchase supplemental coverage to take care of the things that they're used to having covered. Just regular doctor's visits, medication, lab work, physical therapy, anything like that, you need to purchase supplemental insurance. And of course, that supplemental insurance has monthly premiums, it has co-pays, co-insurance, all those typical things. And then there may be things that are not covered by that insurance, or there may be limits. So any of that, you're going to have to pay out of pocket. So if you have a health condition right now, something like diabetes, something that's going to go with you into retirement, or maybe there are some medical conditions common in your family history, you need to make sure that you really have adequate coverage going into retirement, because if you don't, that can drain your savings very quickly. So healthcare, step 2. Step 3 is long-term care, and it's related to healthcare, but it is a separate thing. The Department of Health and Human Services just put out a study, and they are estimating that 70% of people that are turning 65 this year are going to need some form of long-term care. On average, women need longer care than men because women have longer lifespans. And the average time that people receive long-term care is just over 2 years. So keep those statistics in mind. The odds of you needing it are pretty high. Now, the term long-term care, it can encompass several different types of care. Home health care, assisted living, adult daycare, nursing home, all of that is encompassed in long-term care. And there's a few options that you have for paying for this type of care. Now, you could pay out of pocket if you wanted to, but that is, of course, going to eat through your assets very quickly. If you are looking at a 2-year stay or longer, if you have a condition, maybe Alzheimer's or Parkinson's, where it's a long-lasting need for long-term care, that could absolutely wipe out your assets. The average cost of a private room in a nursing home right now is almost $8,000 a month. So if you think about needing care, you can see how that can go through money very quickly. Now, if you decide, okay, we'll just let Medicaid pay for it, that could be kind of a harsh wake-up call. Going back to step 1, where we thought about our standard of living, Medicaid is not going to provide you with anywhere close to what most people consider an acceptable standard. So if you let the state pay for your care, first of all, you're going to probably have to spend down all or most of your assets until you have almost nothing left. Now, every state is different, but here in Illinois, Medicaid won't kick in until you only have $1,200 left to your name. There's obviously some exceptions if you're married, but if you're single, that's what they'll do. And if you think, okay, well, maybe when I'm in my 50s, I'll transfer my assets over to my kids. They will dig through all of your finances, and they will look at those types of things, and they consider that fraud. And then, there's consequences for that. Usually the assets still have to be spent down. So don't try that. The other option that you have is to purchase long-term care insurance. And this insurance is not cheap. It can be expensive, but if you do the math, it more than pays for itself when you actually need care. And then if you have a partnership qualified plan, which means that the insurance company partners with the state and then the plan is qualified, it prevents you from having to spend down your assets in the event that you do need Medicaid at some point. So it can save your estate, it can save everything that you've worked so hard to create. So you want to take long-term care into consideration when you're doing your planning. And then the fourth thing that we need to think about is how long you're expected to live. Now, obviously, you cannot predict this, but the Social Security Administration has a benefits planner. They use actuarial science, and they can actually give you an estimate of your life expectancy. And this is the website if you want to write it down. So you can go there, you put in your, if you're male or female, you put in your age, and it gives you a life expectancy. And if you reach age 65, it tells you how long they think you'll live. When you reach 80, It'll tell you how long they expect you to live. So you can use that, and that'll give you an idea of how long you need to plan your money to last. So once you know how long you can live, then it's time to work on doing some math. So our next step here is budgeting. So at this point, you've decided on the kind of lifestyle that you want to have. You have researched the cost of healthcare at the level that you want to have. You've researched the cost of long-term care, and you have figured out your life expectancy. So now you can make a budget, which basically means what debt and what expenses will you have in retirement. And I know this could be one of those things where it's real easy to just kind of shake your head and say, well, I don't know, how am I supposed to know that? That's the most common reaction I get, especially if I'm working with somebody who, they're 20 or 30 years away from retiring. So this part can be challenging. And I understand that. It is truly impossible to know exactly what bills you're going to have. But it is still an exercise that you need to go through, even if it's frustrating. So I always work with my clients. We do 3 separate budgets. We do one budget for each decade, just like we did our visualization for standard of living for each decade. We do the same thing with the budget. So you need to give some serious thought as to how each decade is going to change and how that will affect your expenses. There may be a time when you decide you don't want to own a house anymore and you want to go someplace that's less maintenance or less expensive. Maybe you want to do that in your 70s. Or, thinking about where you want to spend your last few years of your life. So thinking about each of those decades, that's going to affect your expenses. Now, just a note, when you're doing this exercise and you're writing down these dollar amounts, use today's dollars. Do not try to guess at how much something's going to cost down the road. We'll get to that in a minute. Right now, when you're doing this budget, just write down what it's costing you today, or what it would cost you today if you were paying for that. You want to include everything you can foresee yourself paying for in retirement, every single bill, just like if you were making a budget for today. So that means call and get quotes on Medicare supplements or insurance. Call that nursing home that you think maybe you'd want to stay at. Find out how much it costs to stay there. Research the property taxes in the county where you want to live. Include things like your utilities, entertainment, prescription medications, insurance, housing costs, even things like if you're planning on remodeling the home or doing some landscaping projects. A lot of times these are things people wait until they're in retirement to do. So write all of these things down. Once you have them written down and you have your budget for each decade, then we move on to step number 6. This is where we account for inflation, or that question of, well, what will it really cost me later? Now, the dollar inflates at an average of about 3% per year, give or take. So that means in about 20 years, plus or minus a few years, the value of the dollar will be cut in half. In other words, everything will cost about twice as much 20 years from now. So since you did your monthly budget using today's dollars, now you have that whole dollar amount of how much you need per month or per year. It's real easy to do some math to figure out what that number will be with inflation. So I have a website. There's a lot of inflation calculators online. This one's totally easy to use, very simple. But just plug your number in. You put in today's dollars. So let's say you determine you're going to retire 20 years from now. You did your budget. It said you needed $100,000 a year. So you go to this website, you put in $100,000, 20 years. It calculates out and it tells you that you're going to need about $180,000 a year, 20 years from now. So at this point, figure out your budget and then add in the cost of living or inflation. So now you've got that part. Now you know what your annual income needs to be because you have your budget. So now let's talk about income. This is the last step in figuring out how much you need. Most people, when they do this exercise, you're going to have multiple sources of income. A lot of people, you're going to have Social Security income, and you can find out what that is going to be if you go to ssa.gov. If you create an account, it will give you your estimated Social Security benefit. Now, the closer you are to retirement, the more accurate this will be. If you're still 30 years away, that number is definitely going to change over time, but at least it gives you an estimate. And when you go look at this, you're going to see 3 different numbers. You're going to see an estimate for retiring at age 62. You'll see an estimate if you retire at age 70. And then you'll see an estimate if you retire at retirement age. That retirement age is set by the government. It's based on the year that you were born. So it could be 65, 66, or 67. It's usually one of those 3. So if you retire at retirement age, then you get what's called your standard benefit. If you retire early, the benefit is reduced. If you retire later, the benefit is higher. And if you wait until you're 70 to take your benefit, you could retire earlier, just not take Social Security. So if you wait until 70 to take Social Security, you get 124% of your retirement benefit, and that is the most that you can get. So that's one area, Social Security. Some people are expecting to have a pension. Now, pensions are set up by employers. They're very unique to the employer, so they can be different. So I don't ever make assumptions about pensions. So you'll want to talk to your employer or the HR department, find out what your expected benefit is going to be from that pension. Other sources of retirement income, pretty common, would be something like a 401k, various types of IRAs. If you work for a municipality, you could have a 403b. But look at those accounts and trying to figure out the income that you can derive from those. That can be a little complicated, but the simplest way to do it is to try and figure out what balance you're going to have in the account at retirement, and then look at that balance and determine how much per year you want to withdraw. And we're going to talk about that in a bit, about how to figure out that number, but that's another source of income. Some people plan on working while they're retired. A lot of people enjoy having a part-time job just to keep busy. So that could be a source of income. You may own rental properties. Maybe you own a business that you don't plan on selling. You still plan on drawing an income from it, but you're going to be retired from it. Whatever it is, write down every source of income that you have and what you're estimating the income to be. So now you have your income. There's one more step from here, and that's to look at taxes, because obviously taxes are going to affect income. Now, before we get into that, because that's a whole nother section of this presentation, I'm going to launch poll number 2. All right, let me get to poll number 2 here. All right, so poll number 2, do you understand how to figure out your retirement budget and your income? Basically, the section of the presentation I just went through, just want to make sure you guys understand it. So yes, you understand what you need to do to figure out your budget. No, you don't, or you're not sure. So I'll leave this up for a few seconds and you guys can respond. I'll give you guys a few more seconds here. Okay, awesome. 80% of you said yes, so that's great. Excellent. All right, so let us dive into taxes. All right, now I have this lovely piggy bank here because retirement is a period in your life when you only have a set amount of money to live on. Whatever's in this piggy bank that you've saved up over the years, or your Social Security, your pension, whatever it is, it's a fixed amount of money. So reducing your taxes should really be a priority when you're doing retirement planning. Because once this piggy bank is empty, you can't really refill it unless you get a job or maybe win the lottery. So I always tell people, be careful with this piggy bank because this is all you have. So we just talked about all the different sources of retirement income. So let's look a little closer at the tax implications for each of them. So when I talk to my clients about taxes and retirement, I like to have them picture a fence. And on one side of the fence are sources of income that are fully taxable. The other side of the fence is income that has no tax at all, no type of tax at all. And then riding the top of the fence is income that's got some form of tax other than income tax applied to it. So these are the three buckets that your income could fall into. So in the bucket of full income tax are things like Social Security, a 401k or 403b, your traditional IRA, SEP IRA, simple IRA. Any money that you have in these types of accounts, you will pay full income tax on this. So if you go back to step 6, where you wrote down all the different sources of income that you have, any of these you need to subtract income tax. Now, one question I get is, what tax rate should I use? That, again, it's impossible to know because tax rate change, and it's going to depend on what your overall income is that year. But in general, what I use just as kind of a guide is if your income is expected to be under 100,000, I use 25%. If it's between 100 and 200,000, I use 30%. And if your income is projected to be above 200,000, use 35%. Now, these numbers might seem high, and they may end up being too high, but that's not a bad thing. It's always better to underestimate your income. All right, so now riding the top of the fence, this other tax. So that means it will have something like capital gains tax applied to it, a Roth IRA, annuities, if you have other investments, stocks or bonds, bank CDs, even a simple savings account. Any of the earnings in these types of accounts, you pay tax on. The money that you initially put in, your principal, you can withdraw that tax-free. But the portion of your withdrawal that comes from your gains, you pay tax on. Right now, the capital gains tax is 15%. I don't know what it will be down the road, but that's what it is right now. Now, I want to talk about pensions for a second. If you have a pension, the taxability of that is going to depend on whether or not you contributed to it. And if you did contribute, if your contributions were before tax or after tax. So if you're not sure, talk to your HR department or talk to your accountant to help you figure out what your tax rate on that pension is going to be. But in general, pensions do have some kind of tax applied to them. Now, on the totally tax-free side of the fence are investments like whole life, universal life, and indexed universal life. Now, a lot of people are not actually aware that life insurance can be an investment and it can be used as retirement income. A lot of people just think life insurance is something that pays out when someone dies. But, and there's a wide variety of opinions on life insurance, but I always recommend having life insurance in a retirement portfolio for a few reasons, which we'll talk about later. But the point here is, in regards to taxes, any withdrawals from these types of life insurance policies are completely tax-free. Now, as a financial coach, I always tell people that it is important to have assets on both sides of this tax fence. You don't want it lopsided, especially towards the taxable side, because as I said a minute ago, you've got that piggy bank of money and it is finite. So if you have to send 25 or 30% of that piggy bank to Uncle Sam, to the state, to pay your taxes, that's not always a comfortable thought for people, because you've worked so hard to save this money up. And since there's no idea how much the tax rates may go up in the future, I always advise people have money in all three tax buckets, but definitely on the less taxable side. Okay, so we're moving into now our section on talking about the accounts that we have that earn interest, and then what kind of income we can expect from those accounts. So I'm talking about accounts like a 401k or an IRA. So I'm going to launch the third poll here. And I want you to tell me how much you think you can safely withdraw each year from a market exposed asset. These are the assets that are invested into a stock market or some kind of an index or something like that. How much can you safely withdraw each year from them? So I'll give you a few seconds to answer. All right, a couple more seconds, waiting for some results to come in here. Okay, so I got answers all across the board. Most of you said it depends on my average rate of return. In reality, the correct answer, regardless of your rate of return, unless you're below this, is 3 to 4%. Now, this might come as a surprise to some of you, because there's a lot of advice out there and a lot of financial professionals I have even heard say that you can withdraw 10% safely or 8%. So if you're using that number when you're doing your calculations, or if that's what someone's told you, this section is especially important to you. So I'm going to explain why 3 to 4% is the safe number. Now, I have a lot of charts in the next few slides. I apologize for that. But it is a common misconception that if your annual withdrawal amount is lower than your average rate of return, your money will last as long as you do. So if we look at this chart is for a hypothetical Mr. and Mrs. Smith, and they have $1 million in their retirement account, and they just retired. They decide to withdraw 10% of that per year, and you can see that reflected in this 100,000 withdrawal every year. That's 10%. And during this 30-year period, the average rate of return at the stock market was 14.84%. So when we sit down and run these calculations and we say, well, the average was 14.84, they withdrew 10%, they should be fine. In fact, looking at their account value, it's growing. And then when they pass away 30 years after retirement, they have this amazing little nest egg here to leave as inheritance to their heirs. Now, this chart is using the average rate of return, and this can often look quite wonderful. It's a very easy number for financial advisors to use when calculating retirement, or really calculating any kind of return, but it does not tell the true story of Mr. and Mrs. Smith. reality is during those 30 years, so this is real S&P 500 returns for these 30 years. These are actual returns. And you can see if you look at these, most of the years were up, and there are quite a few that had some very significant gains. I mean, goodness, look at this. And there's only a few years that were negative. A couple here, this one, here's one. Couple not so good years, 1%, 3%. But for the most part, if you look at this, you think, oh, there were definitely some amazing years. Look at these two. And overall, this period of time had an average rate of return of 14.84%. These are the real rates of return though, but let's see if we apply Mr. and Mrs. Smith, they're 10%, they're $100,000 per year. Let's see what happens to them. They run out of money in year 15. So this is a very different reality than that rosy picture of, well, we're withdrawing less than the average rate of return. So now let's talk about that 3 to 4% number that I gave you a few slides ago, because I want you to understand how that number came to be and why that's the number I use when I work with my clients to estimate their income that they can take from their investments. So there's a method of running simulations, not just in the financial industry, it's used in a lot of industries, but it's called the Monte Carlo simulation. And basically, the Monte Carlo simulation uses history to try to predict the future. And it creates tens of thousands of different scenarios. By looking, when we're talking about retirement planning, it looks at any given day in recorded market history. So pick any day. And it sees what would have happened to someone had they retired that day. And it calculates the historic probabilities of running out of money X years into retirement based on the withdrawal rate that they choose at the beginning. But every simulation that's run, it does not matter how much money they have in the account. It doesn't matter what day or what year they retire. Every simulation shows nearly the exact same result. They all show that the odds of your retirement money lasting for 30 years are not good once you exceed the 4% withdrawal rate. And this line is the 30-year line. So if we look at this graph, this is the probability of not running out. So if you look up here at the 3% withdrawal rate, the probability of not running out is high 90s, 98%. You look at the 4% mark, you're at about an 85% chance of not running out of money. 15% chance that you will. But now look here at 5%, just 5%. Now you have a 60% chance of not running out of money, which means you have a 40% chance that you will run out of money. And then down here, obviously it's even worse. Now, these odds, these are not good odds. I don't recommend any of my clients bet on those odds with their retirement money. So that's why I stick to these numbers up here. 3 to 4%, the odds are pretty good that your money is going to last through retirement. Now, there are definitely some things that you can do that will increase the amount of money you can withdraw every year, or increase the length of time that your money will last. One of those things when you get to retirement is you can convert some of your money or all of it into an annuity. That will bump up the percent of your income. The other thing that I recommend, and this usually results in the highest possible income, is to direct some of your investments that you're making now towards a volatility buffer. So let's talk about what a volatility buffer is. It's also called, you could also call it a midterm asset. They're both, the terms are interchangeable. But earlier, when we were talking about taxes, and I mentioned that there's a few forms of life insurance that have tax-free withdrawals. Those types of insurance policies are midterm assets. There's a few other benefits to having a midterm asset in your retirement portfolio. And the reason it's called a midterm asset is, if you think of, look at this bridge, and think about your assets. This pillar over here are short-term assets, things like a savings account or a CD, things that are meant to be used in the short term. They are not intended for retirement. And then over here, you've got your assets that are intended for retirement. You have your 401k and your IRAs and your money market and all of those things. But there is nothing in between. And that's where the midterm asset comes in. It bridges this gap between the short term and the long term. Now, the volatility buffer part of it, this is very important. So I want to talk about that. Yes, this money is tax-free, but in my mind, the buffering part of it is the most powerful feature of the midterm asset. And what this means is that when you have the ability to leave your investments alone in those bad years, you give them time to recover, and you pull money from an asset like this that is not exposed to the stock market, you can actually make your money go further. So I have one last chart for you. So this is an example. So now let's say Mr. and Mrs. Wilson have $750,000 in their retirement and they want to withdraw 10%, just like Mr. and Mrs. Smith. Mr. and Mrs. Wilson, they want to withdraw 10%, $75,000 a year. These are the same exact rates of return that we were looking at earlier. You can see they're going to run out of money in year 14, just like Mr. and Mrs. Smith. Now, if they have a volatility buffer in place with enough money to buffer 3 to 4 bad years, so for them, 75,000 times 3 to 4 is about $250,000. They can make their money last all the way through retirement. So you can see in these 3 years, instead of taking $75,000 out of their 401k or their IRA, they left it alone. They didn't touch it, and they pulled this money instead out of their midterm asset. Just doing that, those 3 years, look where they're at in 30 years with their money. So it buffers these bad years and gives the account time to recover so that you don't have this dramatic drop off in the balance of the account. Now, when we run Monte Carlo simulations using a volatility buffer, the results show that if you have enough money somewhere to cover 3 to 4 bad years, that's all you need is 3 or 4 years, you can make your money last 30 years at a much higher withdrawal rate. And these types of life insurance products, when they're designed to be used as investments and volatility buffers, and not just for insurance coverage, they can accumulate significant cash values where you can actually build up enough money to have buffering in these 3 or 4 bad years. So let's talk about the other 2 features of a midterm asset, because a lot of people, when I tell them this, I say, oh, if you had 2 or 3, 3 or 4 years of money somewhere to buffer this, then the rest of your savings will last to retirement. They think, oh, well, I'll just put $250,000 in a savings account. Well, savings accounts don't have growth. And we are talking about retirement and saving for retirement. And if you were just thinking about saving for retirement, your initial thought is usually not to use a savings account for that purpose because it doesn't grow fast enough. And if you wanted to have $250,000 in savings at retirement, you'd probably have to put $250,000 in savings. because it's not really going to grow. If you actually factor in inflation and then the capital gains tax, you're probably going to actually lose money. Savings accounts and CDs do not grow fast enough to be used for retirement. So we want our retirement accounts to grow, and a properly structured midterm asset will do that. I actually have a few types of policies that I work with. They have an average growth rate between 6 and 7% a year for the last 20 years. Now, that may not be as impressive as a 401k, or the growth that you're seeing in your IRA and other assets that you may have. But one advantage that a midterm asset has over traditional investments is that it is not exposed to the market at all. So that means there's no risk of loss. The worst that you might see in a bad year is zero gains, depending on the type of policy you have. There are some policies that actually have guaranteed minimums, but they all guarantee no loss. So that's the other side of the protection coin. You've got the volatility buffer protecting you in retirement from any bad years. And then you have the downside protection keeping you from losing money while you're trying to grow the asset. So the midterm asset, I always recommend as part of a retirement plan. It has tax-free withdrawals, the ability to buffer your other assets in down years, and it has growth. The last thing that it brings to the table is accessibility. Traditional retirement plans like a 401k or an IRA, they have you sending money down this long tunnel into the future. And it is meant to be left alone, right? You don't want to use this as a giant piggy bank until you're in retirement. But if you need to access it prior to age 59 and a half or prior to retirement age, a lot of times there's a penalty associated with it, depending on what your need is and what type of account it is. You may even have to pay your current rate of income tax on it, which is possibly higher than what your income tax would be in retirement. So it is a good idea to have some type of asset that, even though it's meant for retirement, it's bridging that gap into retirement, you can easily access it without taxes and without penalties if there's an emergency. So I don't recommend using these assets for access to cash because they have a very distinct purpose. But in the event of an emergency, it's always nice to know that you can get to that money if you need to. All right, so let's just recap what I went over today. First, I talked about how to create your budget and how to determine your income needs in retirement. Next, I showed you the tax implications of various retirement products. Third, I touched on the average rate of return versus real rate of return and how much you can safely withdraw from your exposed assets. And then last, I showed you what a midterm asset is and why I recommend you have one as part of your retirement plan. So hopefully by now you have some good ideas on where to start with your retirement planning, or if you've already started, you've learned some actionable tips you can implement. So I'm going to launch my last poll here. So after attending this webinar, your confidence in your ability to plan your retirement is? Hopefully you all say very high that you learned what you needed to learn, but be honest, I'm always looking for feedback. So let me know how you feel now, where your confidence is at after watching this material. I'll give you guys a few more seconds. Okay, so most of you said better than it was, but still feeling overwhelmed. And that's typical. There's a lot of information that I went through in 1 hour. And some of these tips and some of these different areas can be a bit complicated if you don't already have some experience in retirement planning or investing. So of course, I am absolutely happy to help you. If you have questions, please reach out. I'm happy to provide answers, some resources for you, or even help you putting your retirement program together. My phone number and my email are here on the slide. Take them down and reach out if you need to. So now we've got about 10 minutes left. I wanted to get into the Q&A. So you can just use the chat function and chat in with any questions that you might have, and I'll go over those. So let me go in here. Okay, so first question I have is, I'm 46 and don't have much money saved up. Is it better for me to start a 401k through work or get a life insurance policy like what you mentioned? So I would say everyone's circumstances are different, because I always think about the tax implications and the buffering aspect of it and the growth aspect of it. I usually my normal answer would be to probably do both. But I would have to sit down and go over the actual numbers that you have, how much money you do have saved up, what your budget looks like, what age you want to retire. A lot of different factors go into it, but in general, I would say probably be the best idea to have both types because they work together. Let's see. All right, my financial advisor calculated that we need $3 million for retirement. Doing it your way, how much do I need? I'm confused how to get to a total number. So I don't get to a total number. That's a very common way to calculate it, where a financial advisor will say, okay, based on different factors that they take into account, they say, okay, you need $3 million or $1 million or whatever it might be. I picture retirement like a mountain, and climbing up the mountain is your working years. You're climbing the mountain, you're putting in all this hard work, and that's your accumulation phase. That's when you're building your nest egg. And then you get to the peak, and that's retirement, and you're at the peak and you're celebrating because you made it to the top. And when you get a number like $3 million or whatever it might be, that's the peak, that's the top. You've accumulated $3 million and now it's time to celebrate. But if you have not actually done a budget and evaluated your specific income that you'll be getting from your various sources and calculated it out through retirement, getting down the mountain is, in my mind, much more important than climbing up the mountain or even reaching the peak. If you cannot get down the mountain safely, if you run out of money, that can be devastating. So it's a different approach. So if your advisor has sat down and done this exercise with you and, looked at an actual budget, looked at your healthcare needs, your long-term care needs, looked at the lifestyle that you want to live, and they've worked the numbers through 30 years of retirement and done the math and said this is what you need, then it's probably safe. But if they've just used assumptions to come to that number, I would dig a little deeper into it. Okay. Bev, could you retype your question? Something about midterm assets, but I'm not sure I understand what you're asking. So I'll give Bev a minute to retype her questions. If there's any other questions, please type them into the chat. Okay, I'm not getting any more questions coming in. So I'm going to wrap it up. If you have any follow-up questions or anything that you need, like I said, please reach out. You can call me 815-307-6474, or you can shoot me an email, tiffany@glasssteinfinancial.com. But thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it, and I hope this was helpful for you. Take care.